Hey guys, it's Takasta here again. Welcome to another video review. So today I'll be reviewing the SteelSeries Rival Optical Gaming Mouse. So this is their new ergonomic gaming mouse from SteelSeries. So SteelSeries have always released mainly ambidextrous mice like the Zai, Sensei, Kinzu, the Kana, and the mice previously were ergonomic, the Ikari Optical and Ikari Laser, but those are quite old mice. They were released in 2005, 2006, etc. So this mouse is just a kind of refresh with the ergonomic mouse, trying to capture back the ergonomic, I guess, palm grip niche. So main features of this mouse, they updated with a new sensor. It's actually a new PixArt 3310 sensor away from the 3990 from Avago. They updated new switches, and mainly it's ergonomic. It's quite a big mouse, and it also has 16.8 million colors, I guess you can set if you're really into that thing, kind of like the Sensei. So in terms of its price, it is priced at quite competitive. It's priced at 459 Hong Kong dollars, which well, I bought in Hong Kong, so that equates to 59 US. On the web store in in Europe, they seem to price at 59 euros. So I could have picked this house up like a month ago or a month and a half ago to do a review. However, if I had to get it shipped from the web store, it would have cost me 100 euros, which would have been about like 1,000 Hong Kong dollars. So like double the price that what I would have got it in Hong Kong. So that wouldn't be really worth it. But for 459 for 59 US dollars, I think this is quite competitively priced. In terms of its weight and its dimension, it's fairly heavy. It's at the weight of not as heavy as a wireless mouse like the G700S, but similar to the Sensei, which is about 105 grams, this is 110 grams without the cable. It's a fairly big mouse. It's 13 centimeters in length, 7 centimeters in width, and 4.8 centimeters in height. So in terms of shape, this leads on to the shape. It's quite a big mouse, and I feel like it draws a lot of comparisons to the Intella Mouse Optical, the IE3. I feel like their design really came from it. In terms of the shape, it does take an ergonomic shape. In terms of size, it's very, very similar. In terms of the thumb rest part, maybe not as curvy, but extremely similar. And if you can see on the right hand side, even the fourth and fifth finger rest places on the mouse is very, very similar to that of the IE3. Even though I do find the IE3 much more comfortable, because the Rival seems to take the shape of the Rocat mice, Rocat line of mice, the Cone Pure or whatnot. Not the Pure, sorry, but the original like Cone Plus or what. There's so many, but so I actually didn't like those form factors too much because it seemed kind of flat and fat and kind of straight. So I like a more curvy mouse like the IE3, but this is just my personal preference in terms of its size and its shape. So if you can see on this mouse, your hand does kind of tilt to the right a bit, and you can see in these pictures my fourth and fifth fingers are quite close together, and they are tilted a little bit to the right, no matter if I'm claw gripping it or palm gripping it. So this is a matter of personal preference. I usually play with I'm a claw gripper. I use the Kana V2 as my main mouse. So in terms of this mouse, to claw grip it, it's kind of hard because it does feel kind of bulky. And I'll get to the build quality later, and I'll tell you why I wouldn't suggest claw gripping it. Because of the surface, it does kind of slip through the back of your palm. But I'll talk about that in the build quality part. In terms of its maybe compared to the Death Adder or the Emperor or the Sensei, it is fairly larger than the Death Adder. Death Adder is quite smaller. I'm sure a lot of you are very familiar with that shape. If you haven't tried the Death Adder, please go and try it before I would recommend the Rival, actually. So if you are a fan of the IE3, this is quite a familiar shape, or if you're a fan of the Rocat line of shapes, kind of a feel of it, it's kind of a mixture of the IE3 and the Rocat feel of the mouse. So moving on to the build quality. So I've talked a lot about the shape and the build quality and why maybe it's not so suitable for claw gripping. Well, it uses a matte surface. Mainly the two biggest things that stand out are the matte surface on the top and the side buttons, which they used a very, very rubbery feel, kind of similar to that of the Razer mice with the Taipan. With the new Death Adder, they use a rubber grip. So these are the two main features, and I'll be talking about them. With the surface, it uses a matte surface. So what exactly is a matte surface? Because matte surfaces feel very, very different from each matte surface to the next. I'm sure I've talked about this. I'm sure a lot of you know if you've used mice before. With the Kana V2, this matte surface is quite silky smooth, but even though it's somewhat slippery, but a mouse is small enough for me to claw grip, so I have no problem with it kind of slipping out of my hands a little bit. With this matte surface of the SteelSeries Rival, the quality doesn't feel as nice. It really does not feel as nice. And it doesn't feel as slippery, but it just feels really rough, like rough to the sense that it's rough, slightly rough and slightly slippery. So I'm really not a fan of this surface. And added to the fact that because it's somewhat slippery on the back, when I try to claw grip it, the mouse somewhat slips out. If you can see from my pictures here, the mouse somewhat slips from the bottom of my palm because it is quite a big mouse. My hand is 19 centimeters from the tip to the bottom, and when I try to kind of claw grip it and lift the mouse kind of just like slips from the back. So maybe I'm not applying too much pressure. If I apply enough pressure with my thumb and my third finger to push the mouse back, then I can obviously control the mouse better. But it's just not very comfortable pushing against my the palm of my hand, because it does have indeed like somewhat of a fat base as well. So this is really odd. Like it's not like the IE3, which had a very rounded base, which really neatly kind of pushed into my palm. And with the IE3, because the surface is not as matte, it's kind of glossy, so when you push it back, it kind of sticks to the bottom of your palm. With the Rival, I feel like if you push it back, it kind of just like slips out. So I really dislike that. It's not very comfortable, like for me as a claw gripper, but as a palm gripper, I can imagine you can just move the mouse normally. However, even with that, the surface, even though it's quite slippery, is not silky on the skin. It feels slightly more coarse. With the, if you try the Kana V2 matte surface, it is silky. This is not silky on the skin. Like it's just, it makes my hand feel very somewhat coarse in that sense. So this is just my opinion. You might think differently, but I'm just trying to describe the surface as best as I can. In terms of its side grip, so I described the side grip. It does employ a very aggressive kind of texture for you to say get very good control. So I always feel like it's trying to overcompensate for the matte surface, which is kind of slippery and kind of coarse, for you to get like a very nice grip. But I feel like they overdid the grip. Is extremely large side grips. They look kind of ugly in my opinion. It just doesn't come off as a very beautiful, elegant mouse. Like with the Kana V2, see, if you can see here, I feel like it even just looks aesthetically good. I'm really into aesthetics as well, but this just doesn't look really aesthetically good. And even though, yes, you can grip it and it's very good to grip, however, it's not very comfortable and it's just not very beautiful in that sense. So I hope you guys kind of get a sense of the build quality of this mouse. But everything else, I think, in terms of this Teflon feet, in terms of the plastic or other things, didn't seem too bad. Now moving on to the scroll wheel and the switches of the mouse. So in terms of the scroll wheel, I feel like they did draw a lot of inspiration from the IE3. Maybe comparing it to the Kana V2, the Kana V2 had a very smooth scroll wheel. The indentations weren't that much, and it's really easy to scroll like 2 or 3 clicks at a time. But with the Rival, you do at every denture, it does stop, and you can really feel it stop. So it's good for maybe if you're scrolling through weapons, so like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, like you're switching weapons, for example. That's quite nice. And also, it's just, but you can still scroll. It's not very hard to scroll, but at every stop, you can feel it stop. So maybe I'll compare it to the IE3 here, which is quite similar. When you push it once, it kind of stops there. It goes down, it stops. So the Rival scroll wheel is somewhat similar, but and this you can feel it stop a lot better in comparison to the Kana V2 maybe. Moving on to the switches. So supposedly they used they called it SteelSeries switches, which rated at 30 million. So I'm not too sure who actually made the switches. I'm pretty sure SteelSeries didn't make it themselves. They probably outsourced it to someone else like Omron or whoever. But in terms of the switches, I would say they feel somewhat mushier. So if I can show you like what Omron switches sound like. So this is, I have an IE3 here, which is Omron switches. You can see like they sound basically the same because they're both Omron switches, right? So now I'll show you the Rival. It's much quieter, if you can see. It's much quieter, and it takes a slightly less force to press down, and it bounces back up quite a bit faster. So what that means is actually I feel like you can probably press more button clicks with this mouse. So it has quite a soft touch and kind of bounces back really quickly. So it's slightly more mushy, so I can't really describe it. You can really just watch the video and kind of see for yourself what it feels like. But you can indeed press more button clicks with this mouse than you can with the Omron switches, because the Omron switches takes slightly more force to press down, and there's a slightly longer return. So that's the switches. Rated for 30 million clicks? Sure, why not? You're never gonna click barely like 10 or 20 million anyways. So that's that. Moving on to the sensor performance. So the SteelSeries Rival uses they say the AlphaGo 3310 sensor, but it's actually apparently a pixel art sensor. So I'm not too sure like what happened there, but it is rated technically, even though on the box it says 6500 DPI, CPI, it's actually rated for 5000 CPI, and indeed in the firmware you can double the CPI into 10,000. So if you've ever used the Sensei or the Sensei AMOLED version, you can go up to like 11,000 CPI or DPI. That's just freaking ridiculous. So it is, in fact, it does go up to 5,000 CPI, so I wouldn't really recommend going anywhere above that. You can increase it in terms of 50 CPI steps, and also in terms of its tracking, from 5,000 DPI, CPI and lower, the tracking is quite good. In terms of speed, you can see the maximum tracking speed, all rates above 3 meters per second, and consistently at 4 meters per second actually. And at maybe the lower DPI settings at 1600 DPI, and the jitter is actually almost very minimal. Maybe at 5,000 CPI and at maybe at 1000 Hertz or 500 Hertz, the jitters start to come out. And obviously I did a test for 10,000 just to double the CPI. You can see the jitter is absolutely uncontrollable. So I would recommend using it at maybe like 3,200 DPI or CPI or lower in order to get the optimal gaming performance. And usually I wouldn't really recommend 1 millisecond gaming anyways. I usually go for 500 Hertz because it's just much more stable and the jitter is just much more consistent in that sense. But it's really up to you. In terms of acceleration, so apparently this sensor, because it does use the same sensor as the new Mionex 7000 and the Mionex, the ergonomic, I forgot what the new one was called, the Avior 7000. So the acceleration, really I tested it, it feels none. It's almost zero acceleration or felt acceleration, although you can adjust this in the firmware. You can adjust the acceleration and the deceleration, which is quite nice, really. So overall, in terms of sensor performance, even though I disapprove of the quality, the sensor performance is quite good. It's very similar to that of the 3090. It's one of the better sensors out in the market. So the fact that they implement it in a relatively cheap price point, I think is maybe worth the buy if you don't have maybe a 3090 mouse. If you have a 3090 mouse, the felt performance is somewhat similar, even though the tracking speed seems to be higher, and even though you can up the CPI to higher as well. Lastly, moving on to the software. So this mouse uses the new software from SteelSeries, the SteelSeries Engine 3, which they implemented for the new mouse Rival, this 9H, as I showed you in my previous video, and the Siberia. So in terms of the software, I guess there's nothing much to it. You can adjust the colors easier, you can do the macro button programming. I never used the macro button program because that's just me. I never really was into that. But if you're into that, that's absolutely awesome. You can set the CPI for in two settings. There's onboard memory that you can save as well, and 50 CPI settings, as I said, from I think 200. You can go with 200 to about 10,000, but I would not recommend anything above 5,000 anyways. So it's quite a nice form, I guess. It's very pleasant. I guess the new upgraded the interface is quite nice. So nothing to complain there. Okay, so in conclusion, this the Rival, is it worth the buy? At $59 is quite a cheap price point, and if you're an ergonomic user of mice, I would suggest this. This is not a bad option. Personally, I have shifted away from ergonomic mouse, so I always use the Sensei, I've always used the Kinzu, the Kana V2, etc. But I never really got into ergonomics. However, I do have a lot. In terms of the i3, I love the i3. It's just a good replacement in terms of its shape. Not exactly. I've never been a fan of the Rocat kind of feeling of the mouse. So this is, in terms of shape, it is kind of a i3 plus Rocat kind of feel. In terms of its performance, great. In terms of its build quality, dubious. I'm not quite sure, too big of a fan of the matte surface that I employed here. It does feel cheap to almost a certain extent. And then when I try and claw grip it, it just kind of slip from the back of my hand. But if I'm trying to palm grip it, it's okay, but the surface does not, it feels kind of coarse and does not feel comfortable on my hand. I would much prefer the surface of the Kana V2, the matte surface of Kana V2, be drawing a direct comparison, or even the matte surface of the Sensei Raw for that matter. In terms of side grip, I'm just not too big of a fan of it. But other than that, this kind of feels like the Crate 2013 edition, where the build quality wasn't too great, but the sensor tracking was awesome. So, $59.99, would I recommend? Well, if you're into ergonomic mouse, as I said, get it. For me, I'm probably going to sell it, not going to keep it. But maybe it didn't really meet my expectations. I wish the build quality was better. In fact, if the build quality was better, I probably would keep it. And I would do with the shape. Like, I would just stick with the shape. But because of the build quality and the shape, not really my cup of tea. So, hope you guys enjoyed that review. I'm not a SteelSeries fanboy. I don't like every single product that SteelSeries come out with. So this is not exactly one of them. But hope you guys enjoyed that review. And hopefully I'll be coming out with more soon. So, thanks a lot for watching, guys.